Board of Education, Wednesday, March 26th. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with justice for all. The mission of Region 15, a collaborative community committed to excellence, is to educate every student to be productive, ethical, and engaged in a global society through proven and innovative learning experiences supported by its strong community, whose decision-making is based on the best interests of all students. So tonight we have another budget workshop. It's a special budget workshop because we have invited the boards of finance from both Middlebury and Southbury to join us. And to ask us any questions that they would like. I know that they've submitted some questions ahead of time. If you have a presentation, but I thought it might be helpful if we were on the table so we can hear who you guys are and you can know who we are. To start before Mr. Smith does the presentation. So my name is Mary Manzo and I'm the chair of the Region 15 Board of Education. Heather Rogers, treasurer.
Steve Soriano.
Shannon Cavallo, chairperson of Board of Finance.
Joe Martino, finance director.
Carrie Javetta, assistant superintendent. Jennifer Maglio, board clerk.
Steve Giacomi, Southbury Board of Finance. Vince Cipriano, Middlebury Board of Finance. George Flaherty, Middlebury Board of Finance. John James Sires.
Sherry Maddox, Southbury.
Sally Romano.
Tom Marks, Southbury, and Secretary. Dr. Smith, Superintendent.
And I see Casey Donkey from the Southbury Board of Finance is also joining as well. Not calling you out, Casey, you just went around and said everyone's name. So I'll turn this over to Mr. Smith for his presentation and then we'll get to the discussion.
I have paper copies for, should be enough for people in the audience too. We'll go through the slide. It'll either remind you of some things that might have been our initial budget presentations, questions that came in over the last couple of weeks, and then there's some time if you have additional questions. I'd like to welcome you here. Appreciate having the boards of finance from both communities join us to talk through the budget process. When we do create a school budget, we start with the mission, vision, and our areas of action that drive the work that happens in our schools. All of the things that are in our budget tie back to these four initiatives here. The idea that we want to build welcoming, inclusive schools, the idea that we want to build a meaningful instructional environment, the idea of communication and transparency with stakeholders, and access to something that comes out of high school. Not everybody necessarily goes to a 4-year college or a 2-year college, but we want you to be ready for what's next. We often get questions about kind of the return on investment and what this budget does. And so we'd like to highlight a few. This whole presentation will be 100 slides longer if I talked about everything, but I'd like to highlight a few academic pieces, but also other ways that our students shine. For multiple years in a row now, we've had schools of distinction. Those are schools that the state of Connecticut sees as in the top 10% of achievement in the state. We have students that are selected for musical awards, theater awards, athletic awards. For the second year in a row, one of our PE teachers was recognized as State PE Teacher of the Year by their organization. We had 42 students that participated in the annual American Mathematics competition that took place in November. Both our girls and boys swim team won state championships. The idea being is that we have success in the classrooms, academically, and in lots of other ways. I also like to highlight that the Board of Ed received an award earlier this year for their work. Some cost efficiencies that you're going to see in the budget tonight, these are things that are already represented. There's an increasing need of building projects that we've been talking about. If you drove up to the high school tonight, you saw new tennis courts, you saw a storage building. There's a pool renovation that's almost complete. We fight against some of the inflationary costs that towns have as well. Some highlights that, and I don't think the board's actually seen it laid out in this way, but we wanted to put some things in there. We locked in our electricity rate, especially in a market that's pretty volatile right now. The solar energy projects that we have are generating about $45,000 a year in energy credits. We had two Eversource Energy leases that were no-cost leases that paid off the natural gas conversion projects that we have. And so all two of our facilities now run off of natural gas. We locked in oil at $2.70 or $2.70 a gallon. The energy piece is interesting. So we've been undergoing LED reno in our schools. I thought it was impressive to look at the cost offsets of those projects that, had we not done them, would have added about $426,000 in energy costs to our utilities line. Transportation, we have in the middle of the contract for our bus contract, there's a negotiated contractual increase of 3.8% in there. We locked in diesel. And then we have a regional transportation collaborative. So special education transportation is something that creates a lot of volatility for us. There's not a lot of vendors, and oftentimes those vendors can charge exorbitant rates. And so we're working with about 7 other school districts on a transportation collaborative. These aren't necessarily cost savings, but they are cost offsets. The kind of obligatory pie chart. What's interesting is earlier this year, we were looking at some budget documents from 1995, same pie chart, same percentages. So while the dollar amounts change, we're a service organization. Most of our dollars every year go to people. And then that's that breakdown. We've been working on the pension over the last 5 or 6 years. So our total benefit overall benefits line, that's health insurance, pension, other benefits is up 8.92%. Health insurance specifically is up 13%. We can continue with our contribution to the pension fund, increasing that by 40,000. There's a couple of slides in there that speak directly to that pension fund. Excess cost. Now, I know that some of you may be new to this meeting. Excess cost is the largest state-funded grant we get. It offsets the cost for special education services. It's somewhat complicated. I'm happy to give a brief overview tonight and spend as much time as anybody wants. But basically, there's if you think of a high deductible healthcare plan, it's based off of our per student cost, and our deductible is 4.5 times our per pupil cost. When we exceed that, anything more than our deductible gets reimbursed at a percent. That percent is subject to change. We changed the law 2 years ago now with an aspirational amount of 88%. That would be the amount we spend over our deductible would be reimbursed at 88%. We did not budget at 88%. They actually funded it in October at 60%. And then after a lot of outrage from communities, they upped that to about 73%, I think, this year. And that came in February through a special appropriation through the legislators. That difference would have been a $480,000 loss of revenue to the school district. And so that swing is pretty large and represents a 0.5% increase in our budget. So had the state legislators not made the adjustment in their current legislative session, our proposed increase would have been a 0.5% higher. Because of that legislation, we've been able to absorb that. They haven't actually allocated the money in next year's budget, but we feel that it's an appropriate risk that if they took the measures this year in an emergency, that shows intent to make sure it's correct, at least at current level fundings for next year. Here's a breakdown of our major object codes, these individual increases in the lines, the percent of the total budget, and then the increase each of those lines represent in that 4.49%. Going a little fast. Am I going too fast for anybody? Okay. Here's perhaps one of the more interesting slides, and certainly the biggest driver of either town budget. This is the ADM, or average daily membership, for each town and community. This goes back to 1995. The red represents Southbury. The orange is Middlebury. If you're above the line, that means that your enrollment increased, or your percent of the district's enrollment increased in that year. And it's out of a whole, so if one town increases percentage-wise, there's a proportionate decrease in the other town. And what was interesting is if you look at the 1995 through 2005, you'll see that Southbury pretty consistently over that time experienced population increase. And then that shifted somewhere around that 2006 timeframe, and for the last 20 years, that shift has been Middlebury. The higher the line, the larger the shift, which means that the higher shift in budgetary increase. So regardless of what the overall school budget goes up, this drives the percent each town pays of that overall budget. And in the 1995-96 year, don't quote me on this, but I believe the Middlebury's proportion was about 26%. And as of next year, it will be 34%. So over the last 40 years, there's been a significant shift in the percents. Here's how those shifts break down. You take the total school gross budget. We then reduce that by any revenue received by outside agencies, federal, state government that offsets our overall school budget. That net budget is the cost increase. Because there's a revenue decrease, it's an inverse proportion. There's a revenue decrease in state aid. You'll see that the net budget impact to communities is larger than the actual school increase by about 0.1, almost 0.2%. When you roll that breakdown through the ADM percentages, that's how you get the town's costs. And you'll see that the percent increase in Middlebury happened because of that enrollment shift and the number of students that shift next year. It's actually based on the October 1 number of 24. So it's the prior year October 1 number that drives next year's budget ADM. I'm pretty critical sometimes of our friends at Hartford and for the fact that they push a lot of costs down to the local taxpayer. In both our communities, the educational cost sharing grant, this goes to towns, it does not go to the school district, but it's meant to offset costs in communities for education. Both towns see an increase next year in that amount, which if you run all of that through the ADM gives you the direct cost to taxpayers for the school district increase. Enrollment projections every year we do demographic studies within the school district. You'll see that the 24-25, while we've seen declining enrollment for the last 15 years or so, we're at the trough, we're at the bottom of that curve, and we're projected to increase. Most of this increase comes at the elementary level, and you'll see that that grows pretty substantially over the next 10 years. The good news is the high school is going to move from the 997 or so up, but our high school is big enough to absorb those students. There's not going to be a proportionate cost increase for that enrollment increase. Promise pension slides. We have pension slides. So Region 15 manages our own pension. The pension is for all non-certified staff. Anybody certified as a teacher in Connecticut is part of the teacher retirement fund, and it's a state-funded pension, not through the towns or the schools. The groups that are in the district pension plan are our paraprofessionals, our secretaries, and our custodians that account for about 236 current and retired employees. In 2019, we sunset the defined benefit plan and moved to a defined contribution plan. And so anybody hired after 2019 is in the defined contribution plan. Our current pension obligation is budgeted at 1.1 million. We began to increase this back in 2020 by 30,000 a year. The budget proposal that you have in front of you ups that to 40,000 per year, up by 40,000 a year. Here are the actuarials of that pension plan. Our projected investment rate of return, the rate of inflation. These are generated by our actuarials and not by Mr. Martino or myself. You can make your own judgments on the inflation rider there. On the slide, you have the accrued liability, our current value, and then our net pension liability. So we've increased our funding rate by about 3%, 2.5% over the last year. This is the pension performance, where those lines intersect, the purple and the orange. That's when we are fully funded. At our current rate, we would be fully funded at about 2030, or our pension obligation payments and our contribution will match. Currently, Region 15 goes under has two different audit cycles. We have an internal audit cycle that is a voluntary one that we hire and work with them on what is audited. Currently, they're on a contract for $24,000. That is the amount that's in next year's budget. Next year, we have targeted the school lunch account to be the audited object code. And that they did give us a risk assessment for the next couple of years where we can prioritize what other major object codes we look at based on their multi-year plan. In addition to the internal audit, there's a mandatory external audit. This is state mandated, and those are the accounts that that outside audit looks at. In addition, Region 15 has a double slide there. Apologies for that. In addition, we have our own bond ratings. So the regional school district goes out for a bond rating just like the municipality would. We met last week with the Moody's bond rating agent, and we gave them a series of documents and interviews. Currently, the district is rated as a AA2. Normally, the school districts, regional school districts, would be rated at one tier below either town. So that AA2, I believe Middlebury is AA1, and that puts us at one below. One of the areas that they highlighted for us as favorable were our revenue projections for the current year, fund balance, and the tax bases of both Middlebury and Southbury. We've had a cyber liability plan for the last 6 years. All of our audits are completed on time, and we were surprised to learn that a lot of municipalities are having trouble getting audits done at all, so they are very impressed with that. I hope that by Friday of this week, we will have our bond rating. Anything out there? That was, and there were no areas that they identified as weaknesses or detrimental to the district. Currently, we have a $11 million bond that was approved by voters back in 2023. We issued a 1-year bond anticipation note. That's how we got some of the projects underway. We did get a grant for about $700,000 from the state to offset the HVAC work that's being done. You cannot bond a state reimbursement. So the good news is that reimbursement will bring our actual bond issuance down to 10.2 million and save about $500,000 over the length of that 20-year bond. In 2021, we had a roofing study. We're in the process of updating that study now so that we can do some of the roofing work. The study in 2021 estimated each roof to cost between $1.5 and $2 million to replace. I'm going to take it through a roof planning cycle. So our roofs are eligible for state reimbursement under a state construction grant. In order to do that, it's about a 1.5-year cycle of process. So the study is happening now. We would then get roof designs and costs. Then we go to the Board of Education for approval. Once we have that, then we go to the state for approval of their grant process. At that point, we can go out to bid. And then if all that goes well in summer of 26, we can actually start the first roof. One of the things that we're trying to avoid is bonding roof projects. They're not, while they're expensive, when in the bond market, they're not that expensive. And so there's a lot of fees tied to that. So our plan is to use our current debt service line. I know there's been some conversation about why you have a debt service line if you don't have debt. And part of the reason we can do all of this is that the debt for Long Meadow comes off. We want to use that debt service line to avoid taking out more debt. So this is a tiered approach. The roof at Long Meadow, the actual cycle might change a little bit based on that roofing analysis, but as an example, the roof at Long Meadow would be replaced at a cost of about 1.5 million. We would apply for state reimbursement, which would be about 50% of that. We would take the 750,000 we got back in reimbursement and kind of reinvest that in the next roof. So the roof theoretically would cost 750,000 of local funds. Then you would finish that project. Again, apply for reimbursement for the next project and see that. The turf field is going to come end of life in the next 5 years. That is not a reimbursable construction expense. So when we get to replacing the turf field, that will be a pure pay out of pocket. And so if we leverage the reinvestment and recycling of that state construction grant for a couple of years, then when the turf field is done, we have 3 roofs done, and we basically use that seed money to make the one-time turf payment. So it's a little bit of a complicated piece. There's a lot of recycling, but believes it avoids any need to take out debt or issue bonds to do a $2 million roofing project.
Did we check RMS roof too?
So RMS roof is in better shape and with another section of the RMS roof, so it's not kind of a wholesale replacement. But any that you asked about Rochambeau, because the next slide talks about, yes, sorry. Yep.
What's the amount of debt that's coming off from the?
Well, last Long Meadow payment was 810,000, which was made this year. And the band payment interest of 450,000 of that payment. So it's approximately about 400,000 that kind of transfer to debt service this year, then move to capital.
Sorry. No, it's okay. This would be the new Rochambeau Media Center air conditioning unit installed in 1980. It was not that color when it was installed. So in addition to the roofs, we do have a lot of HVAC work that we're looking to use capital funds to replace. That was kind of where our presentation on budgetary issues or line items. We did get some questions specific from board of finance members, so I'm going to take you through some of those. Some of the questions were about per pupil expenditure. In the questions that I can pull up, but are also online, there's a pretty detailed analysis of per pupil. It kind of ties into a question that was asked about refuge services. So if you look at our elementary and school budgets, you'll see an increase in their refuge or garbage service line. It's not really an increase. In the past, we budgeted that as a central account, as a district-wide garbage account, and the state likes to break down the accounts into per school spending, so you can look at what it costs to run an individual school. So the shift you see in this year's budget is the shift of that refuge from a district account to the school account, and it'll save us some time in how we report that to the State Department. In addition to that, that kind of ties into some of this slide here, where if you look at all this data set was selected by a board of finance member. There's a lot of different ways to look at school district comparison sets, and there's different pluses and minuses. But for this purpose, it looks like Region 15 is a major outlier in this spending piece. When you look there, and there's 2 reasons for that I'm going to walk you through. On the bottom there, I put down a breakdown of Region 15's line. And what's interesting, in 2023, we had an ESSER grant for $800,000 that we used to build portables at Long Meadow. This year, that money was put into our administration account. And so it disproportionately raised this account by $800,000, which breaks out to about $225 on a per student basis. And every district captures some of this data a little differently. But for example, very few districts have their own pension account. Those accounts are usually on the municipal side. So of that 1,650, 1,700 in per pupil spending for what's labeled administration, $276 per student is the pension contribution, which is about $1.1 million. Also in there is that $800,000 or $225 per student federal grant. The social security Teamsters, we'll talk through in the next couple of slides. Some districts include this in a district-wide account like administration. Some would break it down into a building account. And so these are the same, as the slide, these were the other two comparisons. When you looked at per pupil school-based administration and the comparison set, that Region 15 is above the average, and you look at per pupil instructional cost, Region 15 looks to be above the average. When you just grabbed Region 17, but you can look at any region and you grab all of those accounts, you can see here that the support services general, we are disproportionately high, budgeting about 1.6 or spending about $1,600 per student, where Region 17 was $271 a student. But that inverse is when you look at central and other support services in Region 17 is spending $1,800 per student, and we're at $197 per student. So while these are standard accounts from what's called the EFS report, or the state's financial system that we submit our funding to, how districts break out some of their costs and define, like that garbage or refuge example, of whether you budget that as a central and other support services or general admission services, districts have some leeway on how they build that. But when you roll it all up to the bottom, you'll see that even though we're disproportionate in some accounts and not in others, the overall per pupil expenditure in Region 15 is less than it is in Region 17, but still kind of within the ballpark. Pulled up the same comparison set for overall per pupil expenditure, and I put Region 15s here. Regional districts are usually higher than municipal school districts for a couple of reasons. The biggest one is that pension that I talked about. And the other one are things like capital expenses, or sometimes like those roofs that we just talked about would be in a municipal bond, not a school district bond, in a non-regional school district. So put down the average of the overall comparison set. Again, this isn't a pure fee comparison set. It's not a small district. It's just a comparison set that someone chose. But when I pull out the regional average, you'll see that on average, regional school districts of this comparison set anyway are higher than the municipals, and then where Region 15 fits in. And yeah. Region 17 is no, that's 8. Lime is 18. 17 is 10. Region 5 is Amity, which is just a high school, which is also an interesting data set. Region 13 is Durham.
Region 16.
The question that was submitted didn't use real. I didn't want to change the comparison set, but I'm happy to put together. Region 16 does not manage their own pension. They outsource their pension, so it's not in there. That is on the municipal side. Then the other slide was trying to look at EPI, which is the state's term for the district performance index. Which is fine. We talked about. There's a report that Dr. Giapetta presented in December that talks through all of the student performance. It's really hard to connect student performance or district performance to the per pupil. Some of our lowest performing districts in the state have some of our highest per pupil costs. There's no direct correlation between student performance and per pupil. There's a lot of things that go into that per pupil cost. It'd be really easy to say you can spend more money your test scores go up. It's not quite that simple. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. And the other piece that I would just point out is that even the district performance average kind of, while it's a fair comparison set, it's one data point, where if you look at some other data points that are masked in that, again, 3 of our elementary schools have been ranked in the top 10% of schools in the state over the last 2 years. If you look at our 24 data, the middle school science data is some of the highest in the state. Our math SAT scores at the high school exceed our DIRG. Again, this isn't necessarily our DIRG, but there's a lot of really strong districts in there that we speak with on a regular basis. And then that district DPI in the 23-24 school year, that's the most recent, was almost back to our pre-COVID level, the pre-COVID level being at 83. And Region 15 was one of the few districts in the state that is almost back to our pre-COVID. We're moving back to that faster than other school districts in the state. And again, there's a lot of different reasons. When you get to, I know that Mr. Michaels couldn't be here tonight, but he likes to ask this question. Last year, I believe we gave you a report of unfunded mandates. There's one on our website as well. Back in 2016, there was a study commissioned about the unfunded mandates that's about 50 pages long. There have been 125 more since 2015. You know, one of the challenges that is hard for us is that some initiatives look like there's a no cost to the district. You have to buy everything for a lot of the legislation that's there, and a lot of it's very well intentioned. The problem is it creates new reporting structures, new accountability structures for school districts, which again, even on their surface, I commend that there's some merit to it. But there is a cost in that there's a labor cost to it, and that's not calculated into any of the legislation that's there. There's some really, I think, well-intentioned legislation around anti-bullying laws, which are, again, admirable at what they're trying to do. They force schools to create structures that maybe arguably they should have had before, but then it creates unintended staffing implications, and that's where a lot of these unfunded mandates come into play. And so the indoor air quality is another one. I don't think anybody would argue about having high quality indoor air. When you talk about that air conditioning unit that I showed you, was one of the newer ones. You know, our air conditioning units, are you talking, the one over the gym was a $330,000 retrofit. It wasn't even a full replacement. A full replacement would have been $1 million. So it's really, again, well-intentioned for legislators to say we're going to improve air quality, but the dollars don't come on the other side of it. And so those are the pieces that we try to work through. We do that through tracking bills in Hartford. We do that by speaking to our legislative representatives and helping them understand that some of those no-cost bills really have an implication in our schools. Then I just put in the budget cycle coming up. And again, we have, I think it's a 14-page document of questions that have come in so far. We'll add some of these to that, and that's on our website. That's phase one. Whatever, and then we open up the questions to you.
Can I ask a question since we were just talking about the mandates?
Yeah.
Janet had been keeping the board of finance in the loop about the mandate from the state about a reading program. And I know that we're fighting back on a bit because we thought that our students were able to test out of it or already had. Where is that at? And forgive me if I missed it. Was it included in this budget for this year?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We were never arguing with the State Department over the need to teach reading or the value, or even arguing that our students could all test out. What we were arguing is that we had invested for multiple years in programs that were high quality, and actually the main program we were arguing about through the process the state now sees as one of their sanctioned programs. And our point was, we report to this board, we report to you on a regular basis, that Hartford shouldn't be able to come in and tell us that we had to spend $500,000 to get rid of everything that we had without at least having a conversation with us. So where we are in that process is that the state approved one of the programs that we were arguing over. So we already had that. We didn't have to invest in it. So I guess the short answer is there are no dollars in this budget proposal related specifically to that mandate.
She made it sound like it was pretty expensive.
What?
It was in the millions.
Yeah, if we had not, if the state had forced us to choose a different program instead of accepting that the one that we were implementing met the criteria, it would have been hundreds of thousands for us to rip everything out and retrain staff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so a couple questions. I mean, First, I'm glad that you guys, I saw the thing for the capital management. Down right here, applauding. How are we managing the capital? I was a little bit, interested in the idea that it's good, I guess, to stick something in the debt service, right? But I was hoping that's kind of temporary in a way, so that you can see, what degree that capital management is being utilized and maybe what it's saying.
And so two pieces. So the debt service is it's a temporary solution to a longer term problem. Plus, we have a building study going on right now. While I can't predict what's going to come out of that building study, we know that we have two buildings that need some type of major work, whether they be renovation, build new, whatever. So the anticipation is that by 2030, that debt service line is going to need to be reallocated to one of these big projects, which is why you see kind of this short-term recycling. Because when that roof structure is complete, the idea would be that would roll into, it's probably not going to be enough for whatever bond project is going to happen, but it will smooth the impact of taxpayers. While that's happening, we have been growing our operating capital budget over the last few years, and that's allowing us to do kind of mid-grade projects. So that right now is 470.
Yeah,
570 in the in the budget proposal you have in front of you, that's like the 570. So still, there was a capital presentation in November that's linked on our website. I can send the link to you directly, but that lays out a little bit how that operating capital will be used. That account's never going to be big enough to do things like roofing projects or major HVAC, but it will allow us to do some of the smaller projects. There's a third leg to that stool.
Well, I mean, it's the capital side of it. You have like a capital budget, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the 575 right now, and obviously there's reserve dollars too, if, something major broke, what kind of was on the list, but, obviously as Josh said, we started budgeting capital dollars in 2001. I think we established 275,000, so we are, we're behind, we're caught up to projects, there's a lot of things here, they're of age.
And are you just keeping the capital sort of as a big pot or as targeting certain?
We give an identified list of items through there, and then obviously if other funding becomes available, addressing other things like as we go, like one project this year was the dust collector down in the wood shop, which from 1979, it doesn't function well at all. So that's going to replace the safe. That was in the current capital budget, for example. So yeah, we're trying to work through kind of as best we can with what exists today. The challenge exists is, like I said, over our heads is very old HVAC systems that are the big units are private units, which makes about $2 million a unit. So we're trying to work through like plans of what those look like to replace and start the renovation. But yeah, dollars are they're large. I'm trying to not make them a big budget impact.
I guess I know more about this, or listen more about this. It's sort of one of my asks, right? Is that retention, right? Is that I guess I've always asked, and you guys have promised me that you have kind of a structured plan about how you react. I understand the structured plan as it exists right now, but how you react over time. Say the stock market crashes this year, so how you react. What do you have some sort of systematic plan about whatever 30,000 or whatever you're giving to it would change if that funded ratio would fluctuate?
Josh, I was talking this into the numbers too. Obviously, some of the growth you see is through the funds, so $1.8 million, I think that went up between the years. But yeah, obviously you saw a big market down here, what kind of where fund level we fall to and where we are. But yeah, there's a bunch of things we're looking at too in pension in general. So yeah, I think there's some other problem is, as we alluded to, getting to that 1.5 million current funding will take some time to get there. On that contributions.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I guess the real question is, next year when everything rolls in and what would make you adjust the 30,000? So for instance, for Southbury, we have a kind of, a kind of formula of sorts that we use. We're gonna get to fully funded in X years and we kind of we do it gradually over time and we have the flexibility about that. But if this graph were to change dramatically next year, what would, what kind of things would drive you to have to, or to put up more money?
Yeah, well, the-
Our budget environment, where we are as far as the rest of the accounting structure, where we sit for our renewals, our benefits, all those things. I mean, obviously that model was done by our actuaries as well. So yeah, I mean, we're aware we're not there yet in the journey.
Well, the other thing that would shift is we would have, I guess, it depends a little bit on how much, right? If it's a radical shift, that's a different conversation. So this year you'll see an investment of 40,000 in our annual contribution. So
Right, so I guess in my brain, I'll sit there and I'll see that slide. And next year I'll come back and if you show me that slide and it looks like, well, it's 2034 before you get to, it comes to the purple line, then, what makes you kind of react in terms of getting more money to the pension? Right?
well, and that's the discussion is, because some of that is the other factors that are happening. So if that goes to 2034 and next year's budget is a 7% increase because healthcare, district near us has a 30% healthcare increase. So if we face a 30% healthcare increase next year and that the market dips and now we're at 34, I think the question is, are we okay with the 34 or do you want the 7% increase to be a 7.5% increase? Or are we willing to cut something else somewhere? I mean, I think that's the conversation, that it's never seen in isolation. Even now, I mean, we could accelerate that if we wanted to. I think the question is, what's the risk benefit analysis of accelerating that? And what are we taking away in order to do that? Or what are we passing on to the communities? And you guys said, hey, if we're good with an 8% this year and dial it up, like, I know it's not gonna happen, right? Just saying.
We could have stated 5%
Yeah.
and fully funded that line. I mean, that was
Right. So I think that's the piece, is that we're trying to find a way to balance all of those needs. And right now, the 68% or so that we're funded at is a pretty market reasonable, like we're in line with a lot of other school districts and municipalities. If that starts to become an outlier, then I think we talk about prioritizing moving this up at the expense of something else,
I've got other questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I knew you had
How
some.
about Mr. Connor, we'll let Mr. Jacoby go and then we'll get back to you.
That's fine.
I like to spread it out, right?
Good idea.
I knew you had several, so I was gonna let them roll. That's all right. The first question was with the roof plan. I think it said that it was with a cost estimate or a cost study that was done in 2021.
Yes.
But under the plan, I mean, the project probably the earliest one begins summer of 2026. We're comfortable with those estimates.
We are not.
Okay.
Right now, actually, as we speak, the person that did those roof estimates is out redoing them to update those prices. And potentially gonna have to update them again as we go for state reimbursement because everything's moving pretty quickly right now.
And so, but the figures detailed in the graphic are based on that 2021
Yeah.
cost estimate, so it'd be highly unlikely that it's gonna be more expensive, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of how much, do we have an indication of that yet?
No, short answer.
They even put a 5% escalator on being 4 to 5% per year. So I talked to Excel about this, but yeah. And again, the order may change if, if one roof's in worse condition than the other, we'll kind of reorder the list.
And yeah, just have one other about I think I saw a slide where it said health insurance costs for employees in the district that participate was 13%.
13%.
And I apologize if I should know this, but what type of plan are they currently under? And have you explored some of the options for other types of plans, talk to the bargaining units, et cetera? Is that 13% a result of any kind of going back to the market? And, originally maybe it was 20, you actually got it down to 13, or just wondering what kind of steps we take.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a health insurance collaborative of which Southbury was part of it at one point. Now here, Middlebury is still in. And so that is, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to our last meeting.
Yeah, we're currently, and everyone's on a mandatory HSA plan. They have been for a good number of years here. We've generally seen renewals, I would say like 5%, 9% the last X amount of years. But this year we had pretty high claim gone through. And as of late, we actually had a path to kind of trend lower to probably 11 or so. And we have just continued to see like kind of pretty significant use through the plan and on the renewals. There's been some negotiations, bargaining tables on some concessions there through the last teacher's contract we did and those things. But again, Josh, my districts are seeing just pretty high renewals on health. And I think being self-insured has definitely served us well. And I think we are, I'm hoping this is kind of a 1 year, every 5 years or so in self-insurance, and you kind of catch a double-digit number. And I'm hoping this is our once in that cycle. We've had years have been at 0
Yes.
and pretty well.
We did change the stopwatch.
Yeah.
Years ago, which potentially saved us some.
Thank you.
Back to you, Mr. Conrad. Unless Ben, you had something, George? No? All right, Mr. Conrad.
So, you know, again, the health insurance, and I think one of the things we're facing is more, you know, the more staff, full-time staff we have, right? The more, you know, these numbers go up because of the insurance, but they go up because of the numbers, right? Sometimes, I guess I was trying to figure out, looking at the details, what's your mix between, do you examine between certified and non-certified staff, and have you changed that? Because it seemed to me when I read through the details that non-certified staff seem to go up more than certified staff. And I was curious about how you run that mix and I mean, and are the sheer numbers of people, like sometimes usually you give us kind of a count, maybe it was a count at the beginning, thing that I missed of total employees and you kind of review that.
Yeah, so the short answer, you're correct in that the percent increase of non-certified staff moves faster than the percent increase of certified. The number of certified staff overall is larger than the non-certified, but the percent increase moves quicker. And that's really driven by federally mandated services. So most of our non-certified staff are paraprofessionals. Those paraprofessionals are there to serve the needs of students with identified needs for those. That really drives that number. And part-time is really not an option. Actually, we have, I believe, 8 or 10 unfilled positions today of those. So the market is so competitive and the salaries for those jobs just aren't high enough. So that you have, like, we can't get people to take full-time jobs, let alone part-time. And so that's really the market pressure on that non-certified. We do have not many, there's a couple of part-time custodial positions, but there's just not a lot of part-time. I need to during the school day for the most part, and we work 35 hours a week. Like, we try some part-time positions, but there's just not a lot of opportunity. I can't have a part-time teacher. We have, I think, 2.6 teachers in the district that we've been able to work with. But it's a very competitive market, and usually those positions, unless there's a kind of organic reason that those folks are in the 0.6 position, it's somebody that wants a full-time position. Every school district in the state has I shouldn't speak in absolutes. Most school districts in the state have open teaching positions right now. So depending on your certification, getting hired is a matter of how far you want to drive and not whether or not there's an appointment for you. So like that 0.6 becomes extremely difficult to hold on to. It'd be great. When we had a 0.6 music position a few years ago, and it was just a revolving door of staff. And so when we're able to, what we have done is reposition. So like right now, that person travels. So instead of having like 2.5s, we have a 1.0 position that we created, and that person travels, which is somewhat inconvenient. But from a stability standpoint, it allows us to keep it. But from an insurance standpoint, that's really complicated.
Plus the advantage on the self-insured plan, obviously, again, if you're hiring some younger staff, possibly, you know, you're paying admin fees and kind of a basic, or if it's a fully insured plan, you'd be paying the full 25,000 of the plan, irrespective of use. So that's kind of an advantage to avoid with some of the parapositions that come through the lines.
And so has the head count in that gone up?
In the non-certified, absolutely. Yeah.
And has the overall head count gone up?
It has. We did an analysis, I I think it's actually in those questions.
Yeah.
Certified staff went to 2018. Now the two certified staff increased, I think, 23 over those 7 years. Non-certified staff increased by about 40 over that same period of time. And again, when you break down that, two things factor into that. When you look at it, someone's going to ask, how do you have declining enrollment when you're adding staff? Most of the staff we're adding aren't classroom people. These are actually reductions in a lot of places. They're mental health professionals, BCBAs, social workers. Those are the positions that we've added from a certified standpoint. From a non-certified standpoint, almost all of those are paraprofessionals that come through an IEP process where there's a team meeting, they identify a student need, and then somewhere in that process, there's an identified need for that student to have a paraeducator or an adult that works with that child. Sometimes it's a couple hours a week, sometimes it's a couple hours a day, sometimes it's all day, every day. But the non-certified increase is driven almost exclusively by the paraeducators.
We actually have a question for you. Shannon had a question that she wanted to ask.
Well, I know that Middlebury, right, and I don't, maybe you guys don't have any more questions, but I know there was a meeting earlier this week, so I just wanted to see if there's anything for the full board, right, to have a discussion on, if there was lingering questions left over from a pre-read.
From what we,
So there was a meeting invite sent for
no one
yesterday.
should, no one answered.
You, what?
No one-
Oh, you didn't. Okay, so there was
I didn't
questions.
get any response, so
Okay.
there was no meeting.
Oh, there was no meeting. Okay, were there questions? I just wanted to make sure we were all kind of on the same page. I didn't know if there was specific questions you wanted to talk through in that meeting or no.
No, just as a discussion point to sit with, Middlebury, who you represent, to have
Right.
just a discussion on, thoughts that you might have prior to this meeting and, I think what we're gonna do moving forward, we're definitely and Jeff's not here. But we'd like to have the representatives come into the Board of Finance meetings early enough so that they can, give us a little debrief as to how things are progressing, just so that we're in the loop and, and I've been at some of those meetings too, and Jerry's on the board, so. That's all, it's just about communication, making sure we're on the same page.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions about the budget?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there's a line about tuition going down for special ed. What's that about?
So that tuition line are students that we service out, or students that we're not able to provide services to in district. So they are sent to other facilities where we pay tuition to those facilities for the students that were required by law to educate. The reason that line is going down is we just have fewer students allocated or that need those outside services next year. So students are moving out, sometimes they age out. We educate some students to 22. So most students to their senior year of 18, but there's a population of students that we serve over that. Sometimes students move out, and if we know that, we reduce that tuition line based on the tuition that was allocated for those students. So there's no, next year it could go up. This year we budgeted for some students. Part of the that line is running pretty good as a positive this year because we had budgeted for 2 students that were at fairly expensive outplaced schools that ended up moving out of district. So if you look in our January report, you'll see our tuition line is well above projected, and that's what's feeding some of our year-end balance. And it's because 2 students that we anticipated being here 1 year. That's probably the most volatile line in all the budget.
What does property mean?
Oh, equipment.
Because it seemed like property went down a lot.
Yeah, there was some equipment in for Memorial Library and there was a reduction there. So yeah, that's probably the biggest.
We renovated the library last year, so that line was higher last year because of the equipment for the new library.
Well, the only reason I worry when things go down is that they're gonna come back next year.
No, it was a one time.
Libraries last renovated in like 1996, so it'll come back maybe in 2042. but we're good for a while.
How do you determine when the textbooks get switched out? Because I noticed that there was a line in there about textbooks going up, but I was pretty sure that they went up the last time around too.
So there's really a flat allotment for textbooks. And then the schools will rotate which department. So if you look through, you should see another line somewhere in whatever school you're looking at that has a corresponding decrease in that textbook line. So in the elementary schools, you'll see a little bit of a bump in there. It's not so much a textbook, but classroom libraries they have. But there's a small increase in next year, and some of that's tied to that reading initiative. I think it's a couple $1,000s per school, especially for kindergarten, first grade students that have decodable texts that are age appropriate. That's what that increase, but the big number is usually at the high school. And so the high school has a set allotment that they use for textbooks, but they have a cycle. So like 1 year it might be the science department, the next year the social studies. There are times where that may fluctuate, where the science textbooks more than the social studies, but the base of that comes from the same pool of money. And then the high school, all the schools have a controllable amount. So while the textbook line goes up, there should be maybe a furniture line or something else that goes down. They stay within that allocation. And our process internally is basically, here's your allocation from last year. One, make sure that you can justify spending that. And if there's anything that's like a Delta Plus and you need more than that, then there's a process they go through to do a justification. And then that's when we start to look at, is that something? The library was like that last year at Memorial.
So say in the high school, how many years do you use a science book before you?
Well,
5 years, 10 years?
yeah, so the interesting, complicated thing is that textbook companies no longer move in the one textbook every 10 years, that they've moved to kind of a subscription model with kind of an online resource. So the good news is your textbook is current. Bad news is now it's $5 per book per year as opposed to $50, but you could keep it for 10 years. So there are some textbooks we have that are that way. Sometimes we'll keep textbooks and only use portions of it, and we'll supplement with some other resources. So kind of the former model of we bought textbooks this year and we spent $25,000 and we're good for 20 years. And that's kind of everybody's moving to a subscription model that, you know, the investors that help our pension fund also want to see quarterly profits, and that's driven more through, you know, cycles instead of one time.
There's something else in there about cleaning products, like,
Those was, yeah,
yeah,
just see,
that seemed kind of, maybe it's up like 11 or 12%.
it could be up, the cost of those have gone up astronomically. Just something as simple as paper towels, even though we did price them, yeah, it's all gone up significantly the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, but it's not like it seemed to me that's a big for a 1 year jump that you just build in, like you have that contract and you go a couple years and then you rebid or something.
We do, and even now we're kind of running behind. If you look at some of the priors, yeah, that we've seen a big, because and now a lot of the hand sanitizer dispensers, all that stuff all hits those lines. So yeah, it's all your floor waxes. It's a significant area because obviously everything comes on a pallet. There's just tons of shipping costs and involvement. We do take it into a central warehouse over by Long Meadow, but even that is still been a lot of escalating costs. At one point, I did an example, I think, on paper towels, and they think they literally up almost 100% in the last 4 years. Versus, even though looking at pricing and everything else, they've been up pretty significant. And they're very basic. We're not, you know, no, no bounty. They're very basic. They are brown paper towels. So.
Joe, just a quick thing on the roofing estimates. You said those are from 2021, from 1.5 and 2 million. You know, once you get up there, like I know with the town, when, we did a lot of roof projects, and there was a lot of other things going on aside from the roof. So was that taken into consideration with those estimates?
It was, and then we'll do additional course sampling into the rows and kind of determine the R value and some other things. Yeah, there's some, but they'll do a much deeper dive into the breaking out and kind of isolating those.
I think we know.
Long Meadows and shingles depends on where some of the bidding comes in on some.
All right, well, this concludes this portion of the discussion. Really want to thank each of you for coming tonight. And sharing your questions, and also appreciate the questions that you submitted ahead of time that Mr. Smith was able to address at the beginning of our meeting. And again, if you have any further questions, please let us know. All right, thank you. We will move to the public hearing portion of the evening. The Board of Education will recognize citizens of Middlebury and New Hartbury. And citizens are asked to state their name, their town of residence, and to limit their comments to 3 minutes. I have my phone set to the timer to keep all of us honest. In accordance with Region 15 Board of Education Bylaw 9325A, speakers are asked to express themselves in a civil manner with due respect for the dignity and privacy of others who may be affected by their comments. While it is not the board's intent to stifle public comment, speakers should be aware that if their statements violate the rights to others under the law of defamation or invasion of privacy, the speaker may be held legally responsible. Due to FOIA, board members typically do not respond to public comment, but we do welcome public comment and we are listening. So if anyone would like to make a public comment, you're welcome to come up to the podium, state your name, your town of residence, and I'll set the timer. No? All right, thank you. Now we'll move to the board budget discussion. So at our meeting last week, we started to talk a little bit about where board members were. There were a few board members not here due to work conflicts. So hoping to get a pulse from the board on where everyone stands with the budget. And if there's any further information people need, any further discussion on, you know, the anticipation is that at our next meeting on April 7th, we will be having our vote. So if anything happens, it needs to happen before April 7th, now is the time to ask for it or talk about it. So we had a good discussion, I feel like, at our last meeting. There was definitely some support or, you know, talk about moving a little bit lower, given the circumstances of the STIP accounts and special education, the reimbursement that we got back from the state. So I don't know if the people who were not here last week would like to opine. Sorry, interest income, revenue, and non-recurring expenses is what we were looking at to possibly bring down the budget a little bit. So I don't know if people want to start with who were not here last week to share their thoughts. Go ahead, John.
I think we can reduce it. I mean, one thing I know, I say it every time, is I think they can take 1% out of the salary budget as a vacancy factor. I think every year it's at least 1% over. With the federal funds coming in, I think we've got some reductions there. In addition, I'm a little uncomfortable adding 3 additional staff. I hear the rationale for all 3. But I think, you know, if we get down to 1 or 2 instead of 3, and the one with the facilities, I think Joe needs some help. But I would say, you know, more clerk of the works or a supervisor than a director.
Okay, so do you have a number in mind?
$500,000.
So 500,000. All right.
I don't know percent exactly. I just did the math out.
It's a $34 million account, so
I meant the
He
overall
wants a
budget.
half.
If we just reduce.
so 0.5% of the overall budget would be, I'll let you calculate it
Yeah,
exactly.
well, sorry.
You get
What he suggested, what is that? Roll it out in budget reduction, like the
About $500,000 gets you down to. Gets complicated on the revenue side, but you'd be right around 5%, 5.03. Yes.
Sure. So I watched the discussion. I think we have some video stuff to sort out because Jeremy's name flashes every 10 seconds, but you know, there's a couple things and usually I write something, but I didn't have a chance this week. So first I want to thank, right, Josh and Joe, you guys come to this budget presentation fully thinking through scenarios, playing stuff out. You don't add fluff. When you look at all the surrounding costs, I've come through Newtown's budget, and Fairfield, because I own a piece of property there. Some other people are coming at 10, 11% budgets. And the items that they are bringing up that they need fixed are getting pushed into their town budget. So their own Board of Education budgets are, everyone is essentially, right, in our dirt above the 6%. And they have components in there like they need new HVAC systems. So if you go through Newtown, some of their buildings are a similar age of us, and they're talking about replacing HVAC, replacing roofs. They pushed it all in the town. They went through a whole 10-year capital plan and all the pieces, and the town is picking up the HVAC replacements. That's $500,000. They budgeted roughly the same that you would. When I went through and did those comparisons, so that's taken their 6 number, right? And if you compare it to us, moving it up significantly more. What I appreciate about you guys is when you come to us with a budget, it's fair, right? And this is right? There's different ways to do stuff. When you do negotiations, everyone starts high and you come to a place in the middle. The thing that I appreciate about this board the most is that we're so transparent. We come at things wholeheartedly from the beginning saying, this is what I need to serve the community, right? Over the past 5 years, we've been doing a lot of work about fixing our facilities, right? And as you guys sat and listened to the questions, right, from the town, they're worried about cost pressure. They're worried about us only putting $500,000 a year into our capital budget, right? They're worried about pension, the market, right? There's a lot of costs that face us, and we're not taking money and putting in a special fund because we don't have that opportunity. So I would be completely against a $500,000 component piece, but I also would really ask us all to individually, like, if we're looking to move like $140,000, what is that to each town, right? And we talk about the federal funds, that doesn't come to us, right? So I know Middlebury, because I live in Middlebury, is floating a 603 number. The number's not 6%, it's 4.29, whatever was on this slide tonight, because that federal money doesn't come to us. Or the state money doesn't come to us. It goes to the town specifically that has to be an offset because we're special, because we're a region. It would be a lot easier if we were Newtown said, listen, I need a roof and $500,000, presenting a 6% number and then saying, there's another 1.5 for the town's gonna pick up. So squeezing out another $140,000 when we have so many capital projects that need to be done. We have so many things. Every time like Joe sends an email, what is breaking now, right? For $140,000, which is what? To each town, 0.1%, right? To put us in a situation, right? That is gonna come back next year and bite us, right? So if that's something, okay, we take out 140,000, but next year we have to put that back in there, right? I would really caution all of us on all the work and everything that we've been doing to build a capital plan, to be responsible. We keep talking about that the last 4 years. For us to start knocking those numbers down, I just don't think would be appropriate. So that's right. Thank you.
Can I piggyback? I appreciate your comments so much. I listened to last week. I did not comment. And I also reflected on where we were last year. We had extensive conversation because there were board members that really wanted to chip away the budget by the same number that we're talking about this year. And I don't really understand what value that brings relative, so the reduction relative to the value and the impact. It seems again disproportionate. I echo everything that you have said. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a fair budget. And I would be remiss to chip away anything given the volatility and some of the components that are fluctuating. I think it's a reasonable budget. I think we have extensive history where we have been presented with fair budgets. And from my perspective, I feel that it should not be eroded at all.
Thank you.
So For the.
Well, hold on one second. I'm gonna let Heather. Yeah, Heather wasn't here last week either, so she didn't get a chance to, yeah.
No, I wasn't here last week, so thank you. You know, we did have a discussion last year about reducing the budget, and I was not on board with that. And the reason for that is the reason I'm still remain concerned. And that is, you know, all of the capital projects in the backlog that we have, in the region. And I do want to make sure that we have, you know, we have our eyes on that. You know, we have a 5-year capital plan. I think, you know, through this budget cycle, Josh and Joe, you've come up with some good plans for the you know, cycling through these roofing projects that we need to look at. You know, I'm glad that we finally kicked off a feasibility study, you know, over the past year to look at PES and GES and all of the work that we know would need to be done on those schools to keep them open where they are, or possibly you know, building something new to replace them. So I was nervous to start creating liability in last year's budget when, you know, the discussion was, you know, let's say we cut however much money we were going to talk about. You know, let's say we were going to cut $500,000 out of last year's budget. You know, we knew that the line item that would probably come out of was capital projects. And then, you know, lo and behold, over the last year, we've had a leak at MES, you know, we've had HVAC units, you know, with problems. I think my concerns were justified. This year, I'm looking at this, and you know, we have talked about a couple things, and you know, we've had prior discussions about those skip accounts, and maybe we do, or maybe adjusting our expectations for that revenue return. The other idea that had come up was this reimbursement that we're getting from the state of special education. I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but I'm talking through a lot of my thoughts.
We talked a lot last
I know. Well, I hate to belabor it.
Yeah.
You know, that reimbursement, I think creates an opportunity. And unfortunately, we haven't got through all of the policy work that we're, you know, setting up. But, you know, we do have this opportunity to create an education expense through that was just created through legislation in the last year, which would enable us, should we choose to go in that direction, to, you know, create something that is more of a special education, a better contingency than what we have now. What we have now is we assign a number to special education contingency. It's a $290,000, which is in the budget. And that is really a best guess from, you know, what liabilities may come in the next year. And, you know, I suppose that number could be 0, but, you know, there are certainly situations where a situation could come where the liability would be much more than 290,000. And in that case, you know, we would have to be looking into other line items in our budget to meet that commitment. I'm taking a very long way around too. I think that reimbursement represents an opportunity to create a better structure for special education contingency. I wouldn't want to use that to say buy down the budget. I would rather use it to structure an actual special education contingency fund that lives through the years, that we contribute to through the years, that we could actually, you know, meet commitments from as they come up over time. So, that's a 400 and, I'm sorry, Joe,
434 was.
434 reimbursement, and then we have a 290 special education contingency. I would be open to, seeding that account and maybe reducing our, special education contingency. And not eliminating it, because I do think we still have room to build an account that would serve as a special education contingency. But I would be open to making some amount of reduction, in that scenario. That said, I'm not talking about $500,000 here. But I'm trying to signal some flexibility. If we want to start going down that road.
Thank you. Right, Tom, I know you wanted to.
Yeah, so I do appreciate the points of view. I do want to just set the record straight on a couple of things. Shannon made a great point that we do have a very transparent budget. When the budget comes to us, I do believe, as I sound like you do as well, that it's an accurate representation of what the district believes it needs. This is a special year because some big pieces of information have come out since that budget was presented to us. The first of which I would say is at the last finance meeting, we realized we're trending toward a $2 million surplus, which can adjust between now and the end of the year. But that is, as you go back and look at other financial reports over past years, in my time on board, that is the largest trend line we've had in the past 5 years. So we are currently in a very strong cash position. Now, some of that is aided by the second big piece of news, which we did not know at the time the budget was presented, that the state legislature sent back our way $430,000 for the express purpose of easing taxpayer burden and funding special education. So to not put that money to use for those two purposes feels like a missed opportunity when we've been vocal to our representatives. We've made progress in getting some of that funds back. And if we were to say, actually, just kidding, we didn't need it, we're just going to stick it in a reserve account and not put it to use to help the taxpayers and put some of that money back in. To me, that feels like it's sending the wrong message back to the people we've been so desperate to communicate with. And then the third piece of information that was new to me, maybe not to everyone at this table, but at the last finance meeting, when you took a look at the revenue that we've been earning on interest. And sorry if I'm wrong, but it sounds like in that meeting that was brought to our attention because perhaps we're a bit too conservative. In this year, we are trending somewhere, we don't know to the end of the year, but somewhere between $275,000 and $300,000 in earned interest revenue. That's what we missed, in our revenue projection in last year's budget, we missed that by a factor of 4. We only thought we had $75,000 in interest revenue. So we are 4 times greater than what we budgeted. So next year, yes, it could be a different rate environment. We're also, however, earning interest on a larger, 4.5% more dollars if we're at this. So perhaps that evens out. But the only data point I have to look at is right now. To budget 150 in next year's budget, when we're staring at, almost twice that amount this year, feels a bit disingenuous. So that's an adjustment we could make in our budget without cutting. That doesn't cut into anyone's capital line. So what that ultimately might cut into is a surplus at the end of next year. And we can talk about if we're purposely budgeting toward a purposeful surplus or not. But, that is not my intention. Has not been my approach to budgeting. So if we feel like we are conservative on that 150, that's an adjustment we can make very easily and save the taxpayers some money because we're pretty confident that that money's in time. So, I hear that $500,000, there might not be, and Steve, I know you wanted to go bigger too last week. I'm hearing at the table, we're not interested in that. I'm hearing some people say make less, but Shannon, you said 150 doesn't make a difference. So may I propose something in the middle, which last week I said about $350,000 would not at all affect our operating budget next year. And the way we could get there is recognizing more interest revenue, pay down what superintendent, I don't have the question sheet in front of me, but you identified about $75,000 in, some of it was in leases where we'd save interest if we just bought that out. It's non-recurring expenses. And then as Heather was saying, using this new tool that we have, which is the educational expense fund. Let's seed that with the money that was given us for the purpose of special education. And then reduce what I see as a very inefficient way of budgeting for special education companies, which is as a recurring item. Let's instead use that tool and have that hopefully approved if we don't use the whole amount. With those three buckets alone, we're not touching operating budget at all. And we can very easily, it's the most painless $350,000 we could ever find in the budget. This is a special year, given all of those recent developments. I think it would be wise of us, especially with some of the asks that will be coming down the road, for us to take advantage and put more dollars in taxpayers' pocket.
So. Sorry, because like there's some things you're saying, Tom, which are not correct. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that as you're projecting this huge surplus. That $438,000 was something we budgeted. That's not a surprise. That's not a surplus. That's not extra money coming back to us. That was always in our budget. What they signaled to us in October is they weren't even going to meet that. It would be less. So we paused our capital projects, things that we were going to do purposefully, and said, we're pulling back.
What are those?
So let me finish.
Well, because I've asked that question 4 times.
Let me finish, let me get there, right? Pulled back, right? And then the state said, well, I'll let Joe kind of talk through, right? We pulled back. And then the state came back in February or whatever and said, oh, everyone is angry. The entire state is angry. We're gonna fund you. We are still short in that line, $51,000. So there's no extra money. There's no extra piece that was given us. We still have a $51,000 net new to budget, right? We're still low. Well, Josh put in, right? The $51,000. So, right, that surplus that was left was, right? So if you have $500,000 down, you're gonna back that million swing, right? Was all because of something that happened in Hartford, where we had to make adjustments in October so that we weren't at this point in time. So say Hartford never did that, and then we can't keep schools open because we couldn't go and spend the money. So I think there was items, right, that, and I'll let Joe speak to, but like saying into the community, there was this extra money, this surplus coming from Hartford is incorrect.
Okay.
Because we budgeted for that and we're still short on what we budgeted.
Okay, so I would be very curious. I've asked a couple times, what are the things we have done without because of this shortfall that we've been holding on?
So for example, till excess costs came in, like we held off on the lighting upgrade in the park, that's up $40,000. Dust collector, those are a few of the items we held back on. Some of the HVAC work, not a long list, but a few, because again, until the excess cost number came through, it was unclear. And even with the shortfall, we still had room there, so at least felt comfortable. It wasn't like, really bad. 6% wasn't great, but at least we knew it was workable inside that.
So how much money are we talking about when you add up those items?
So you look at some of those, about 120,000 are not in that list. You also have, I'm trying to think, a couple escaping at the moment, but yeah, there's a, but we also had the leak at MES, which we obviously took that from capital, so that hit there. And we did tell the board, like we thought maybe we were hopeful we could work that out of capital, not go to reserve, because reserve dollars are kind of harder to put back. So that also hit capital as well.
I think that's the biggest thing, is some of the repairs, like the water pump at MMS that we paid after we knew that money, the excess cost money was coming. Had that excess cost money not come back, we probably would have went to capital reserve. So like some of the projects, if it's emergency, we have to fix it. But it's that slowdown, kind of hold off as long as we can, because then we would have went to capital reserve.
So when I look at that, am I misreading that finance report where I see what the unencumbered funds in our budget
The 1.8.
that are left over?
Yes.
Yeah, it's close to $2 million, right?
So,
yeah.
change.
So you could spend that 120 on the dustbin and the other thing you mentioned, and be at 1 7.
And the
right?
the tuition view changed a lot, because we had the students move, so that shifted those dollars as
So
well.
I mean, that was the point made earlier. Write it down, you know, that it's a little bit of a unicorn that we would have 2 students budgeted, and I believe about 200,000 each that we expected to pay tuition for. So that tuition line is pretty flush because 2 students.
So all of those factors add up, but what I'm curious in the bottom line, I want to understand your point, because you seem to take offense with me suggesting that at 2 million, we're trending toward $2 million.
I just want to keep the record straight
So-
on what happened.
So 1.8 feels accurate, we're trending towards a $1.8 million, like what do you want that number to be? Can we be honest about the fact that this is a big, we're anticipating a big batch of unencumbered funds toward the end of this year? That could be,
But I don't think it'll be a big batch at the end.
well, because what we do is we say, like last year, we only showed 250,000 because we did $650,000 in projects,
That are needed.
but not budgeted for, but weren't budgeted for.
But if we
Right.
were
It's
to
like, oh, we have
truly
a surplus,
budget for the
let's put that
projects we
to-
need, I would say add $1 million to this budget. Right, if we're gonna talk about what we need,
Mhm.
what we need to do, because we don't have a capital reserve account of 14 million and $30 million respectively, we have it at $1 million.
Right.
So if you were to say what we're gonna do next year, this is how, unfortunately, because we don't have any money in reserves, we operate. So if someone said, okay, we should budget for what we need, then I would say increase the budget $1 million. What number is that?
Okay, that's not what we're talking about though. So
But it
the point
is,
the point of the matter is, well, no, I'm not talking about adding $1 million in the budget, right?
well, I don't
It's
know,
hypothetical, but
maybe I am.
put it out there, we'll put it out there now. The point of the matter is this, and it gets back to something I said earlier. Let's have an honest conversation, because I didn't submit the question, but someone asked about over budgeting. It seems like in that model, we are purposely over budgeting to have a big number at the end that we can pay down capital projects based on where that number sits.
Wholeheartedly disagree.
Okay. So,
Yes, I mean, the bulk of those surplus sit in tuitions. I mean, if you look at.
yeah,
you
understood,
know,
understood. But that's gonna be a bigger number this year than in recent years. Is
I know,
that
but
accurate
As
statement?
long as people don't move in though, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
I mean,
the closer you get to the end of the year, the more confident we are that that's not gonna happen. You know, and the adjustment, when we build the tuition line, we build it based on who's here. Right, so we don't pad that line, we don't say, the last 3 years, 2 students a year moved in, so, you know, we don't do any type of analysis like that. It's who's here, where are they going next year, and then that's what we budget for. And then any surprises, anybody that moves in, that's where the contingency comes from, that's where other pieces go. There's been years where that contingency was gone on July 2nd, right? There was 1 year that the budget passed on whatever, May 7th, and like May 9th, we got a new student, so, for the following year. So that line is volatile. I would say that no one adds the budget, but in literally on Mr. Martino's wall is a list of stuff that is in disrepair. And we don't, to Ms. Cavallo's, but we don't budget for that, right? There are things that are in disrepair, but they're not operationally broken. We can make do with them. They're not high priority. So towards the end of the year, sidewalks. All of you walk on sidewalks. Some of our sidewalks are in rough shape. Mr. Plaster was here last, telling everybody how the state basketball tournaments and people were impressed, except for the big hole in the parking lot that had cone stuff in it, so that no one drove in it. So there's not like an annual, we're gonna spend $200,000 a year on parking lot repair. If we get to around this point of the year and those special ed tuition lines are running high, we say, what's reasonable to go and now do? We don't do that in October because we don't know if there's gonna be other volatility. So as you start to see, so we wouldn't necessarily spend down the 1.8, like I think there's, you know, there's something in the middle. But the idea that we've had the budget to do these projects is not accurate. That we do look every month as to how we're trending and then start to queue up projects so that, but you can't do a parking lot that way. You can't do big ones. They're small. We have like asbestos abatement. You can probably do $15,000 or $20,000 worth of abatement project in the summer, but we don't necessarily put together an abatement remediation plan over the next 5 years. We could do that, but it might not be $1 million, but it would be more than we budget right now. And so I think that's where having a contingency or that special ed contingency account, I mean, there have been districts that got hit with $1 million surprise. Right now, we have 290,000. Some years we use that really quickly, some years it's more than we need, but it's not. When you talk about risk, so one person risk mitigation is another person over budgeting, and I think that's the conversation that I don't want to dictate for the community. But you know, some healthy in between would make Mr. Martino and I.
And I think where we sit today with tuition lines, you know, you never want to be too far in either direction. True. I mean, so that they're concerning in a good way, but I mean, you always want to make sure you can fair budgeting everything that sits there. And it's hard to deal with the movement of kids. The other area I'm focused on more is like our health insurance fund. There's currently $2.5 million that's sitting in the fund. We've seen some draws against it. We did cover additional dollars to move money into that fund. But you know, like in the Newtown example, their self-insurance fund, I believe, and I don't know all the pieces, they have to really refill the fund. In order for this board to refill a $2.4 million reserve fund, like that would take, we're not in that position, but I want to make sure we stay into that 25% funding level. You know, so there's a lot of the debt service line obviously contribute to that surplus as well. That's $450,000 unspent funds in debt service.
Good point. All right. I'm sorry, can you just say that last part again?
So debt service, we made the last payment on the Long Meadow bond. That was a year date 8/8/99, and we have currently encumbered $450,000, which is the band interest payment, which is due the end of April. And then obviously that remaining balance, approximately $450,000, that money will more than likely transfer to capital to do along this.
That's
Just a clarifying question. I thought the amount of money you budgeted for excess cost reimbursement, the percentage, is it 65? That's right.
In this current year.
You're right.
Yes.
And then with the Hartford adding the money, I thought said now you're getting 73%.
It'll be around 70.
73%. So I thought that was, when we talk about found the money, I thought that 8-ish% difference, we were expecting 65% of X, and now we're getting 73-ish% of X. That difference was 470. Right.
430.
434.
Okay.
430 brings
So-
us back to 65%, is it not?
It gets us higher. The challenge in the excess cost calculation is, so for example, the kids that moved out were in the calculation of the estimate last year. So the number is really never the same on the total dollar value. So you may be submitting against 6 kids, 10 kids, all depends what you have currently. So the excess cost in reality would have fallen more because obviously those kids weren't reimbursable anymore.
Right. They're not.
So the 65% that we budgeted was based on a higher net cost.
Right, I said 65% of X, and X is now lower than
Yes, that's
anticipated.
Because of the surplus in tuition.
Okay, which I understand, and then, so now we're gonna get close to 73% of X, which is still,
73% of the lower number, which is closer to the 65% of the higher.
Okay.
I'm not, this is telling me.
Yeah.
Right? But we don't-
It only feels
Right,
like
and then you can understand the confusion, right? So the increase, the unexpended dollars in the tuition line is a good thing, right? It's more in there than we anticipated. But the excess cost really is driven by that tuition line because it's, again, the 4.5 times our per pupil. So we have to spend about 100,000 as our deductible, and we get reimbursed by over $100,000. Most of the expenses that qualify for that excess cost formula are students that are tuitioned out to other places. Students we serve here never hit that $100,000 threshold, so they never hit our deductible. So that last year's budget was based on 65% included those outplaced tuition. So those students didn't come. So this year's amount that we could apply for was less. And in October, we were going to get even less than that. But then in February, it's actually the day before the budget. So next year's budget corrects for some of this. But then the adjustment makes it 73%, but it's 73% of the lower number.
right, and that
So-
is, but bottom line is we're still gonna get, so it's not the whole thing, but we're still gonna get more money than we originally.
In October, we thought we were gonna be $480,000 short. The action that the legislators took in February makes that a $51,000 delta. So
So just, so the change from 65 to 73 still results in the shortfall of $51,000.
correct.
So,
Sorry for that little tangent. Okay.
Just have 2 seconds on the interest revenue too. And when I did our initial projections, obviously there were still questions on rates, but also too, we've been very mindful of how we hold caps. Well, back in the day, rates were literally nothing. I mean, so I'm not saying it didn't matter, but you know, again, I know we follow lead of our towns. They do the same thing and far better than we can on our side, because obviously we're only pulling money monthly, where you folks have actual, like, you know, reserve funds that are accruing. So we've tried to kind of slow draw our AP runs to kind of hold that money as best we can to kind of make sure that interest income number is really as high as it can go. So that's where on our total revenue, we're actually ahead about $100,000 on the revenue side overall, even though making up the excess cost number based on at least where the interest is coming. And also too, like rental's a good example, not related to in the revenue column. We're making a guesstimate on revenue rental because obviously we did a lot of readjustment fees. So I think we'll stay where we were, but numbers went. We'll see how all of our new moves kind of come through line and do that. So there's a few things there that we'll kind of watch.
Okay, are there any further comments? I mean, we're not gonna go for a vote now, obviously, but any other?
Well, so can I just get
Yeah.
clarity on the things I was saying earlier? So, and this is, I'm just curious. If I were to pitch the idea of recognizing more revenue in next year's proposed budget based on the strong returns we've had this year, would anyone at this table have strong opposition to that concept?
Revenue based on interest or budget?
Interest, yeah. Like this year, we're gonna make twice as much as we projected last year, so it seems like we're a little low. Seems like that's super conservative. Is there a general willingness to
That's
adjust?
That's what,
It's
I just, when we're talking about asking us to make decisions,
Yeah.
this is where I struggle a little bit, right? We need to use real numbers, right? Saying twice as much is not correct. It's not twice as much.
Last finance meeting, Joe gave a range of 275 to 300.
285 was the number I gave. You're projecting 150, so you're approximately 135.
So we're $135,000, and that's, yeah, somewhere in the middle of your projection. Right. So would anyone be strongly opposed to raising? Is that something we can talk about next week?
Raising.
Instead of projecting $150,000 in interest revenue, given that we're planning on making 285 in interest revenue, can we adjust that number up from 150 in next year's revenue projections? Would anyone be opposed to that? I'm just trying to figure out where we can have discussions next week.
So I wouldn't, right, I wouldn't try to start telling Joe and Josh specific areas. We could talk with us. I don't think it's our purview to really say, do this, do that. I would be okay with adjusting that number, but that $130,000, I would want to go into capital reserve. Like, the number is fair that we're presenting. I don't think there's fluff in here. I think the budget was transparent and honest. And I know that Joe and Josh reworked this the night before when we got new excess cost numbers in. They reworked all of the pieces they know about, aren't something they left in there. They reworked it all, right? The roofs are short. They're going to be short on dollars. We know that. And so, like, the roof's now $1.5 million.
Okay.
It's a $2 million roof, right? So we start talking about what I would consider on a almost $100 million, nickel and diming for $130,000. I'm fine with moving that number, but I want it moved into capital. Like, I'm not comfortable sitting here saying, let's take the number down when I know the list of things we have to do and everyone's worried about that we're short on capital. Like, the town, all their questions, I wrote them all down. We're all about, we don't have enough capital. What's our capital plan? Where's the money? Are we self-funding? We're trying to save ourselves money interest. We have to bond those roofs. There's your $130,000 just in bond fees.
So it sounds like we're all open to having a discussion next week. The second thing is the superintendent has offered $75,000 in non-recurring expenses that we could pay down. Like, they're not necessarily capital related, but you said one was like switches for the
Your
network
numbers
system.
are going up from last week. Tom. Okay, last week you had 50,000 in non-reoccurring.
Superintendent Smith answered a question
Yeah.
about how much we had available.
I know, but you were proposing 50, now you're at 75.
I'm only going with, I didn't have an
I
answer.
think it was seven, it was 40,000 in switches and 35,000.
Yeah, there's some out of it.
Now,
fencing.
that
That's
number
another
could
deal.
be somewhere in between there, but are we open to a very meager number, $75,000 in non-recurring expenses? Can we have a discussion about paying some of that down and taking it out of next year's budget this year?
But is it
And
our
we-
job? Yeah, we should.
What can we take turns? I mean, I don't. I mean, I have something I want to raise with me, and I just don't want it to just be. So.
It doesn't sound like anyone's closed down to that idea.
Yeah, I mean, like, and you said last week too, Tom, that you were looking at the recognizing more revenue. You were
Yeah.
looking at the interest income.
I'm just
the
making
STIP
sure,
accounts,
like, I
And the
don't want these
non-reoccurring. Right,
surprising things next week. And then
Right.
the last thing is, you know, as Heather had said earlier tonight, if we see that expense again, that educational expense, perhaps reducing the amount in the recurring special education payments. Was anyone opposed in principle to having that discussion? So that's off the one of those right now. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was all fair.
But I don't think anyone's answering you, right? Because we're trying to do a line situation. You're saying it, but I think Steve said, like, point of order, right?
Yeah, well, nice.
yeah, go ahead.
So I'm not against, to answer your question, but the question that I'm gonna comment, so the data person that we want to hire is not considered an additional. It's a net neutral position because there's someone that is retired.
I thought there was budgeted.
I know, there's no money in exchange, but I mean, like, there's gonna be one less person because they're retired.
Account, but not cost.
Right, yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's gonna be one more person because we will hire. So I think. I do not agree, I don't want to be talking necessarily about 150,000 or 250. I don't particularly. You're right, it does. It's just, it's not enough to move the needle, you know, either way. I approached it differently, in that, just to briefly repeat, like, if we pass this budget, then we'll have raised it about 18% in 4 years. So regardless of what is needed to be done in the district, I felt that just because we have done that, like, maybe it is time to maybe just put the brakes on it. Because it's a lot to raise it in 4 years. I know they were difficult 4 years, but put the brakes on it to demonstrate some restraint. And that's why I actually had suggested coming down to 3.9, which was what you had wanted. We act like that. I agree that we, like, whenever we have to forego something, we end up foregoing capital. Like, it just seems to be like what we do. And we act like that's not a choice, like that we could forego something else. I stated last week that based, you know, in the next gen reports, we are, for every student, we have more employees per student in that ratio than similar towns. And if we talk about, like, I agree, I think the budget is sound. And I understand that we are, you know, that we have the scores that were in here that someone from finance pointed out. Those were scores from 2 years ago. Our scores have come up, so I think we're on the right track. But I think at some point as an organization, we can say, all right, like, there must be some efficiencies that can happen that can help us lower the number. And as an example is we can let someone retire. I'm sure that person works hard every day and does a lot of valuable work, but that person can retire and we can hire someone else. Well, what happened to the work that person did? Like, where does that go? Like, is that being reassigned to other people? Like, to me, that's a conscious choice of an efficiency that we're making. So I don't so to me, I'm like, well, I think we can I just want to say, it's been too high, I need it to be lower, honestly, we vote on the number. That's it, so really, to me, it's just pick a number. And to your point, if it is lower than the proposed number, let the administrators decide just how that's gonna work.
Right.
And we don't need to, we've given them our opinion, and I think they can hopefully factor that in.
Right. That's typically what happens anyway. Right?
So that's how I am coming at it.
All right. So what I'm hearing is that we've got a couple people that are at the proposed budget, a couple people that are at $500,000 lower, and the rest is somewhere in between. So
I'm higher with that.
you're
You
higher.
just wanna, yeah.
Okay, all right, all right. So I think I'm not hearing any new information needed. Right? So I think that, we could just have our budget discussion and vote on the 7th. And, well, I'll start with the proposed budget. That'll be on the agenda. That number.
So just a question, a logistical question, right? So how does that work that we're all in different places? So like, we'll just keep voting pieces and amending. I'm just trying to understand, like, right, because typically we have been more in a same place. That's really bad sentence, but we have either been like we've been in 2 pages or mostly aligned as we've gone into the lab.
Yeah.
So this would be the first time, maybe, that we're in various places, because I'm hearing like a $500,000 number, I'm hearing a $350 number, maybe 2 places, I don't really know, right? So there is a lot of numbers.
Actually, I feel that there, like I said, I think there's a couple extremes on either side, and I think the majority is somewhere in the middle. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Can I ask a question? Though?
Yeah.
Can you remind me of the vote and the weight? Because that's an important component. I know we talked about that last year, because it's not pure maturity, it's a weighted vote. So can you just remind me of the weight and how that's calculated?
I do not have my chart in front of me.
I think-
But
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. But I think, so how, okay. Yeah, so how the budget votes are weighted, it's a pro rata weighted vote that's decided by the state. So, thank you. A Southbury vote counts as 1.23, a Middlebury vote counts as 0.66. And that is pursuant to the Connecticut census data, and that is prorated, like how our budget is weighted.
Proportional representation.
But I think 10, 15 years ago, it was the exact opposite. Middlebury got like 1.5.
No,
Yeah,
no.
Since the district was incorporated.
yeah, it was Middlebury had more because they had less people, so they had a higher
But we're
percentage.
in the hearing now.
I know.
Yeah,
It's all good. Thank you for the clarification.
My understanding of the statute is there, it's proportional representation. So if you wanted 3 members, Middlebury can have 3 members and Southbury could have 7. And then it would be 1 each.
One each.
But because it's 4 and 6, that's where that weighting comes.
I don't believe that's how it was.
Can I actually just make one more comment on the budget? So
Yeah, sure.
on that
Okay.
number. So I generally agree, Jen, with it, like most of what you're saying. My one concern with the numbers, and again, this is the, like, we don't micromanage kind of thing, but it was more from a transparency perspective, was just the revenue predictions. And, you know, again, this is sort of like moving little things, but it was more of a, more of just a transparency issue of, are we actually doing that properly? And I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of cutting the budget by that, but by putting it into a lot of the months that a lot of the projects that we have in front of us too. But I just wanted to clarify that that wasn't a like, give the, reduce it by this much and that's good. It was more really for the transparency of the process.
And along that same line, I think kind of what you were saying, Steve, I do agree with, like, we have to trust that the administration is going to put the money where it's best appropriated. But I do think that when there are changes and shifts in what that budget is, there is 100% need for transparency. And if that is going to increase class size, right, that's a whole different conversation. If that's going to cut a teacher, whole different conversation. So I want to be very cautious about, well, we're just approving a number and we're giving the administration kind of carte blanche to appropriate it the right way, because there are certain, I think, motivators and factors that are definitely important to the community. And there could be different skews of that, but I definitely would want to understand how the money is being appropriated. The conversation today about the offset, the special ed, like I can get behind that, but I really, really struggle with the fact that there are such a laundry list of things. And we're talking about such a small percentage of such a huge budget, and what is the benefit of that? Well, I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to comment.
Go ahead, Heather.
No, it's too much.
No, yeah.
So I would just, budget brought that up because I wanted to ask it on the last side, but I, would, in my mind, I would make a motion in the sense of, given our discussion on, decreasing the contingency to this or adding, raising the revenue or, blah, blah, like kind of spelling it out. Motion to reduce superintendent's budget by X. So you're sort of spelling out in the motion where you're coming from, right? Like just you can't bind, I think, just the superintendent to doing that. But you can say like, this is why I'm making a motion.
Right, but,
Yeah.
so yes, so how how it goes is that we negotiate different dollar amounts. But if the board said, I do not want the data warehouse, and everyone agreed to not wanting the data warehouse, I don't think the superintendent's gonna get the data warehouse. But it's just much easier to just deal with dollar amounts, unless there's something specific that the board really does not want in the budget. Heather, and then Heather.
I just want to ask, we've been talking about this backlog of capital projects, and, we did have a presentation with a 5-year capital plan. And just for transparency's sake, is this laundry list, is it all on a 5-year capital plan that we already have out there, or is there things that come up that have been added to it since then?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff out there. The HVAC unit, the compressor, 40,000, that was in development, wasn't on capital, it's a repair, expensive repair item. We've got, I'm trying to
But
find.
nothing for PS and GS is on there, correct?
Correct,
So
I mean,
that's the big elephant in the
Well,
room.
so I did, for example, have a conversation with Tecton about kind of the sustainable plan for PS and GS. So I would say, 2030 is, in theory, if all goes well on the timeline. Those schools have 5 years. So the conversation really was, we're gonna take a deeper dive into the roofs, kind of what's up there, if we have to do more patching and those sort of things to make them go. One of the updates, I believe, like the steam traps at Gainfield do not work. The valves that open and close. It's an $18,000 project. If you don't contain the steam, there's a chemical mixture that does, it erodes the pipes, and you get steam leaks, and you have moisture issues. So like that's a project that we push the button on, that's gotta go to get done. That problem is like heating system. So it's.
Those things weren't on the capital, so it's like.
Correct, not on the
Question, the capital is a
So-
known list of
Yes.
fairly large items that are at end of life or beyond end of life and prioritized. In addition to that capital list, there's things like the steam trap, there's things like I'm looking at Sally, but it's the memorial, the sewer line pump that broke earlier this year. So those are things that are breaking. But then in addition to that, I mentioned we have buildings with asbestos that need mitigation because floors are failing. Some of those things did not make the capital list. That capital list was prioritized. We could go back. Part of the reason there's a facility supervisor, I'm fine with the title. It was called the facility director before. So when you had one until I think it was like 2006, I think. And you had a facility director. Part of the reason having a facility director is important to us is because of that tier 2 and tier 3. Joe and I, it's very obvious the things that are on that capital plan. The things that are a little further down the line are less obvious, but when they fail, they become like Memorial was a whole wing there and didn't have a bathroom for whatever that was, 3 or 4 days, 5 days. So like that wasn't on the list. The now plan is not only we replace that one, but redundancy, so that won't happen again. So there's kind of intertwined. The capital list is a we had 470,000 in capital on that list that we prioritized around. I think go back to that November, one of the board members, I believe, asked the question, like, what should that number be? And again, it was hypothetical. If you had $1 million in that operating capital line, you'd have that more like asbestos plan in there, but at 470, you start with what's the biggest stuff that needs to be fixed most immediately that impacts daily operating.
And so the offshoot to that was like, so that began another project at Memorial, because now we're looking at redundant pump system, probably 25 or 30,000. But then we've got redundancy with a pump failure, plus the smaller pump, easier to get. The high school switch failure began another project of what about the other 6 schools and their big disconnect. So now this summer, we're looking at pricing for the service all the main disconnects. And through that process now, the main disconnect at Middlebury Elementary is an end-of-life unit. There's no, each unit has like a rebuild kit. Well, for some reason, which is not our oldest school, MES, that unit has to be an indirect full replacement. So that's about 25 to 30,000. But if the switch fails, there's no other way to rebuild it kind of on the fly. So that's why we're looking at a replacement there. So a lot of projects begin another project and an offshoot of another. So that's kind of where, the capital plan, you folks know the capital plan always evolves.
Yeah,
But
I know. And
those
so
are
where
all
I
things.
was going really was, if we're gonna talk numbers at the next meeting, then I kind of do want to understand, what's unencumbered and what could we do with that? Based on, this list of priorities. And some of them sound, like everything you're saying sounds like things we probably should do.
Yeah.
But, where I'm going with this is, if we're gonna have a conversation about dollars and what dollars, are important to people, then I think one piece of information I'd like to have is this list, kind of like immediate priorities of things that need to be.
So that is the April, sorry.
Yeah, so that'll be a finance meeting, but that doesn't relate to next year's budget, right? Those.
Well, it relates, we're talking about unencumbered money and how to use that. Then I think it does. Because we're, part of what we're talking about doing is moving budget line items because we have this unencumbered money.
But I don't think it's as much as everyone thinks.
No,
going
it's
to
not,
be.
no, it's
But
not.
I don't know, like, if we're gonna have those numbers, right? Because the February,
We're not gonna have a
Just-
final estimate
Right.
for all of that stuff, but I wanna understand, like, what projects are in the hopper, that need to be done.
What I'm hearing is that list can change on a dime,
Mhm.
and that's, I think, always the worry, and
Yeah.
I recognize budgets have been high, but we also have a legacy of not investing in our infrastructure, which is resulting in exactly the situation we're in. So there's a fine balance here, and I think we're seriously having the conversation, but I think we have to be very careful about what we're potentially jeopardizing, even with a small reduction.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we're in a very different place than when I first got on the board. When we had no money in the reserve, and it felt like we weren't doing any upgrades that weren't basically PTO funded. We're in a great place right now in comparison, and I think both of you and all of us actually too for that. Other than PES and GES, which are really the big, like the 2 elephants in the room. I think also at that time, it was hard because we could define what we wanted to and vote on it. But it was abundantly clear that once we passed a budget, it was now no longer our budget. It was the superintendent and finance director's budget to do with what they wanted. It's basically the same thing. But I think the difference now is our relationships with you guys are a lot more transparent. What you're doing with it is more transparent. So if we said, cut it by this much, don't take away this, what can you do? I have more faith in the process now than I did then. And a lot of that was the way it was set. Here, now, this is my proposed budget. Now it's the board's budget. Now it's back on the table, and they could have done what they wanted to with it. So I do trust the process a lot more now, but I do think There is room for discussion next week, I think, you know, maybe not in the exact way, but I'd be open to having a discussion on if there's a little bit of wiggle room here and there and what you propose to do with it. I'd like to hear that.
Define wiggle room.
Yeah.
Sorry, like, what
Wiggle room, like,
numbers we
you guys
talking
are all talking about different numbers. All I'm saying is, I'm open to coming to the table to having a discussion.
Yeah, I think, but will we have the numbers on the roof, right, next time we meet? We won't have that.
I don't know, we'll have them by
That'll
July.
be done this summer.
I just understood that that was.
Just
like
getting the architects lined
usually
up,
off
getting
what
the
we were
work.
planning around.
All right, Steve.
Just here, but just like, because you brought it up and I meant to bring it up too. So there were some comments from community about the Pomperog, was it fourth grade? So, and then had it was reduced a section, and now when I look at this, am I reading this right? It's going back to the next year, they'll be in fifth grade, and I see 66 projected enrollment for teachers, so 16.5, okay. I think it might be helpful if you just, we saw your Saturday report to us, and you mentioned how the class sizes can ebb and flow, you know, over time, based on who moves in or who moves out, or what teachers are out there, rooms in the building, and union, and discussions with the principals and all that. So this, to me, though, is not, when we talk of this, is not a contract. Like, I think you get to change this as you did last year. You get to change it again if something happens. I think this is like your good faith estimate, but things can change. And I think the community needs to know that. Like, I don't want people voting yes or no because they cannot be 100% sure that if their kid is going to be whatever grade, whatever school, this is going to be the ratio. I just to put that out there. It's not a contract. So when we talk about, okay, yes, you have a number, even if I don't want it to tie your hands and you can't change this. Just
Can I comment though, because I think.
well, that's up to me.
Yeah. Are you done, Steve?
Yes.
All right.
I think the situation is slightly different in that we recognize that class size is fluid, just like students moving in and out of the district is fluid relative to the budget conversation. I think the concern, and frankly, it was my concern, I spent, I think, 2 hours in your office in early September talking about, this was one of my items. And we've seen an influx of communication coming in since, is that it was communicated that it was headcount neutral. And as a result, there was a 25% increase to that class size. And I think we're not talking about class here, class there. It was a significant increase. So the 16 to the 22 and 23. And when we start talking about teachers' time with students, understanding the needs of students, how to teach to their needs, we've just increased the workload and decreased the ability for teachers to spend that time from an instructional perspective with those students. So from my perspective, I heard mixed messages last year, and I've spoken about that since this cycle of the Board of Ed has started, and it's continued. And I think that the instructional classroom size is a very important element of the conversation to parents who have children in those schools. And I think it also speaks to our infrastructure, because 23 children is a lot, perhaps. In other districts, it might not be. I think it's high. It's also relative to the space that they have. And if you spend time in that classroom, it's hard. And I'm only in there a little bit, and I think it's hard. But I think it's also trying to ensure that what is put on there from a transparency perspective, I think that there was a sudden shift in August, and that had a significant impact. This is not something that's multiple parents have come up to me, multiple emails have come in, and as a parent, I also was concerned about it. I think it is a very important conversation, and it's one where I hear, well, we'll make adjustments to the budget, and I think there needs to be boundaries. Again, this is not a contract, and things have to be fluid, and we need to make sure we can manage the business. But I do think that it's an important conversation because it can be perceived that it's impacting instructional education.
So, yeah, I just want to be clear that if this budget is passed and then this changes, like, that's okay. Like, it may not be okay because of the reasons you described, and it may be almost, we're leaving people as out of sort of, they think one thing and something else happens. I understand that's upsetting. I think though, what you're like, we have class size guidelines, and these are all within the class size guidelines, even at 23. So to me, as a board, when we set policy, like this should not be part of a budget discussion. It should be, well, then do the guidelines need to change, right? And the guidelines are, sometimes they show up on different slides, sometimes not.
And I think those are pre-COVID guidelines, correct?
And
They
the
haven't
guidelines
done
are-
it, yeah, they haven't changed, yeah, for a while.
If you want to have post-COVID guidelines, then I think that needs to be a discussion held outside the stressors of passing the budget. And, I think then you get the superintendent input, and if these were, and we go from there on the setting of guidelines.
I do think what I'm hearing from the board, though, is not touching class sizes in this budget, or really touching anything substantive in the budget proposal that Mr. Smith did. It's more a discussion of, do we want some unencumbered funds shifted in a different way to reserves or the educational expense account? Thank you. So it's more of a philosophical discussion about capital reserves and what to do with projects that need to be done. That's what I'm hearing. So I think that's all doable for April 7th. It's interesting you guys have stayed here. I've said last week that I would love to match the reserves that the towns have.
Cheers.
It takes years.
Yeah.
It takes years.
The journey.
Yeah. And I get it, and we're a little bit late to building our reserves because, we had a different philosophy with the prior superintendent and administration, and we have definitely shifted things to a better in a better direction. But I agree with you, Shannon, that, we need to build our reserves because, we have a lot of facilities, more than the towns, and very expensive things to fix at times. So I absolutely hear that. I absolutely hear what Tom is saying, that, we have some unicorn issues that happened after the proposed budget. I think, and I hope that the board can come together and reach consensus and some kind of middle ground on these kind of like a more limited view of what we're discussing in the budget. Like, we're not touching the data processing center. We're not touching, I'm not hearing that kind of stuff. So I am comfortable basically saying, let's talk budget on April 7th. Do you want to do something more in terms of a list of immediate priorities for projects?
Actually, no, finance is at noon on Monday. So
Ready to
it's right
roll.
before the board meeting, so it's like,
Okay.
we're just,
Perfect.
right, yeah,
We'll have that list of finance, then we'll bring it
yes,
here.
so we will be,
We
I'll
can
keep it up.
and you can bifurcate that list a little bit too.
Yeah.
About what, yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta, originally that was gonna be at a year end, what are the things that we want to address now, but we can layer in, here's some things that we can do now that would reduce that. We've been through, and I know it's hard for the people on the outside to understand the vast majority. How can you look at a $94 million budget and find $75,000 worth of non-recurring costs? And the reality is that, again, to the question around textbooks, almost all of the items in our budget are shifting to a reoccurring utility, staffing, all those are reoccurring costs. When you get down to that, what can you buy one time that is not gonna come back in a future budget. The list is pretty small. I think after that, you start looking at what services you no longer want to provide. That's a different conversation. But of the one-time, non-recurring capital, there's just not a lot that's in that budget. So we'll have that list for you on, whatever finance, April 7th, right?
All right.
Mary,
Yes.
can we clarify the ed expense account for the, I'm not sure, so the,
Go ahead.
yeah, just do so. The legislator at the end of last year, we've always had a capital reserve fund, which is always in 2% of the fund, because 2% of the operating budget get transferred into it. Late session in June, the legislature made what's called an educational expense account, which then it is a little bit like an unrestricted fund like you folks have, but not exactly. It can go towards educational expenses, special ed costs, or really any place in the budget there was an over to we fell short, not just capital items. So we talk about, so now the board has like two funds established, one of which the board has established the ed expense still. But that's, you hear those terms, that's where those two items come from. It's capital expense and
And to
I
be
thought it
clear,
was 2% total for both.
it is.
That
And
2% was
it's
so the amount hasn't changed.
no, amount is unchanged, but the, you
Where
know,
you can put it.
yeah, where you can put it
And we've
in.
never come close to putting 2%. I just want to be clear with
Yeah.
everybody listening. It's usually like 1/2 of 1%,
No money.
if that.
Yeah, and the board is seeking to do through policy and curriculum committee to define the educational expense guardrails. And we talked a little bit about this last week. PNC is looking to maybe limit it to only special education costs,
Unless there's a 2/3.
unless there's a 2/3 vote to do something else. So we're trying to,
This will be a full board discussion. no doubt.
right,
That was-
right. But since Joe was talking about the, I wanted to explain that further. All right, any other questions or comments?
Just the finances that listed on this.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it. Yep. That's my bad. All right, so announcement of future meetings, April 7th. We have a finance meeting at noon, and that is at MIJ. Also on Monday, April 7th, PNC is meeting at the Broad Media Center at 6:30. On that same day, we have our regular Board of Ed meeting, where hopefully we will be voting on our budget and adopting a budget. Monday, April 28th, PNC meets at 6:30. Also Monday, April 28th, Board of Ed meeting at the high school, 7:30. May I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Heather. Have a second?
Second.
Steve, there's a second.